The body was found in a place designed to erase noise. Room 312 of the Ashcroft Business Hotel stood at the far end of a carpeted corridor where every footstep was swallowed before it could echo. No broken furniture. No shattered glass. No signs of forced entry. Just a man seated upright in a desk chair, wrists resting loosely on the armrests, head tilted slightly to the right as if he had fallen asleep mid-thought. Except he hadn't. The first responding officer described the room as too arranged. The curtains were drawn. The bedside lamp was on. The air conditioner hummed steadily. A laptop sat open on the desk, screen cracked but still glowing faintly, and on the small coffee table between the bed and the television there was a single glass of water, half full. The victim was identified within hours. Dr. Leonard Vail, 46, private forensic consultant, former government analyst, known for testifying in high-profile criminal trials where digital evidence decided verdicts. He had checked into the hotel under his own name. He had no visible injuries. And he had been dead for nearly 18 hours before housekeeping knocked and received no answer. Detective Rachel Monroe arrived just after sunrise. She stood outside the room for several seconds before entering, scanning the hallway, watching the guests who slowed as they passed. Crime scenes in public spaces were different. There was always an audience. Inside, she didn't speak immediately. She moved with deliberate precision, past the bed, past the bathroom door, stopping 2 steps away from the body. No blood, no ligature marks, no obvious trauma. But something was wrong. If you follow cases where the scene looks clean, too clean, you already know those are the ones that unravel the slowest. Pay attention now. The details that seem irrelevant at first are usually the ones that matter most. The medical examiner's preliminary assessment suggested cardiac arrest. There were no signs of struggle. Toxicology would take days. Natural causes. That was the easy explanation. Rachel didn't believe in easy explanations. She walked toward the desk. The laptop screen displayed a corrupted document. Lines of unreadable symbols filled the page. A small external drive was plugged into the side port. Its indicator light blinked slowly. The cracked screen wasn't from impact with the floor. There were no scuff marks, no debris. The fracture radiated from a single point near the center. Precise, concentrated pressure. Intentional. She leaned closer. There was a faint smell in the room, metallic, almost chemical, but diluted. Not strong enough to trigger alarm. Strong enough to linger. On the nightstand, Dr. Vail's phone rested face down. No missed calls. No outgoing calls. Last activity time-stamped at 8:17 p.m. Security footage showed him entering the hotel at 7:42 p.m. alone. No visitors registered. No visible tail. But cameras don't see everything. Rachel shifted her attention to the victim's hands. Fingertips slightly discolored. Not bruised. Not cyanotic in the typical pattern of heart failure. The nails were clean, trimmed. No defensive scratches. She glanced at the glass of water, untouched. No. There was a partial lip impression on the rim, faint, barely visible. But Vail's lips were dry, cracked slightly, as if he hadn't taken a sip in hours. The glass had condensation rings beneath it, suggesting it had been placed there recently, not the night before. Housekeeping logs confirmed the room had been serviced at 2:02 p.m. the previous afternoon. At that time, the desk was reportedly empty. Now it wasn't. Rachel stepped back. "Who benefits?" she asked quietly. The question wasn't for the officers. It was for the room. Dr. Vail wasn't just any consultant. He specialized in forensic data reconstruction, restoring deleted files, recovering encrypted drives, reconstructing digital trails criminals believed were erased permanently. 3 weeks earlier, he had testified in a financial fraud trial involving offshore shell corporations and missing development funds. 2 executives had been convicted based largely on his reconstruction of encrypted accounting records. Both were awaiting sentencing. Rachel requested the autopsy be expedited. While the body was transported, she stayed behind. She studied the desk surface under angled light. There. Faint abrasion marks. Circular. As though something metallic had rested there briefly and been removed. She opened the external drive connection carefully. It required a password. Standard. She removed it for lab analysis. The hotel manager insisted no one had accessed the master key for room 312 overnight. Keycard logs showed only Vale's entry at 7:403 p.m. and no subsequent door openings until housekeeping attempted access at 11:26 a.m. the next day, which meant either 1. The killer never left, 2. The killer never used the door, 3. There was no killer. Rachel walked into the bathroom, everything pristine. Towels folded, no water in the sink basin, the mirror unmarked, but the trash bin contained something unusual. A small, crumpled square of silver foil, not from the minibar. Medical-grade packaging. Empty. She bagged it. Back in the main room, she looked again at the body's posture. Too composed. Cardiac arrest victims collapse. They clutch. They fall. They struggle for air. Dr. Vale sat upright. Arranged. Outside, the city traffic was beginning its morning surge. News hadn't broken yet. It would. A forensic expert found dead in a hotel room without visible cause. Media would speculate. The defense attorneys in the fraud case would watch carefully. Rachel stepped into the hallway and called Roland. He listened without interrupting. "Natural?" he asked. "Not if you look at it," she replied. There was a pause. "You thinking toxin?" "I'm thinking someone wanted it to look quiet." Back inside, she took one last look before the room was sealed. Her eyes returned to the laptop screen, frozen in corrupted code. If Vale had been working on something that night, someone had tried to destroy it. But they hadn't removed the drive. That was either a mistake or a message. By noon, toxicology results from rapid screening indicated trace compounds inconsistent with common cardiac medications. The silver foil tested positive for residue of a fast-acting synthetic paralytic. Hospital, restricted. Administered properly, it could immobilize a person within minutes. Administered improperly, it could stop the heart. Dr. Vale hadn't collapsed. He had been unable to move, which meant when his heart stopped, he was still conscious. Rachel didn't react visibly to the update, but she replayed the scene in her mind. The lamp on. The chair positioned. The water glass placed deliberately. Someone had stayed in that room after Vale could no longer resist, and they had arranged him before leaving. The question wasn't just who killed Dr. Leonard Vale. It was what he had uncovered in the hours before he died. Because forensic consultants don't check into hotels to relax. They check in when they don't want to be found. And someone had found him anyway. The autopsy confirmed what the room had tried to conceal. Dr. Leonard Vale did not die of natural causes. The paralytic found in the foil packaging was identified as a fast-acting neuromuscular blocker typically used during surgical intubation. In controlled environments, it renders a patient temporarily unable to move while maintaining full consciousness unless paired with anesthesia. In uncontrolled doses, particularly outside hospital supervision, it can cause respiratory arrest. Vale's lungs had filled gradually. He had suffocated while seated upright. No sedatives were found in his bloodstream. He had been awake. Detective Rachel Monroe stood at the observation window as the medical examiner finished the briefing. There were no needle marks on the obvious areas: arms, neck, hands. The injection site had been located along the lower rib cage, just beneath the line of his shirt. Hidden, precise, administered by someone who understood anatomy, which narrowed the field. This wasn't rage. It wasn't improvisation. It was execution controlled, clinical, and silent. The time of death was refined to between 9:10 and 9:40 p.m. That left less than 2 hours between Vale entering the hotel and losing motor control. Rachel shifted the timeline. 7:42 p.m. Vale enters hotel. 7:43 p.m. Keycard entry. 8:17 p.m. Last phone activity. 9:10, 9:40 p.m. Estimated paralysis and death window. No door logs after his entry, which meant whoever administered the injection either was already inside the room, gained entry without using the keycard system, or exploited a structural vulnerability in the hotel's access design. The hotel's infrastructure blueprints were requested. Meanwhile, the digital forensics lab began imaging Vale's laptop and the external drive. The cracked screen wasn't accidental. Microscopic analysis revealed impact from a narrow, cylindrical object, possibly the blunt end of a metal instrument, enough to fracture the LCD beneath the glass without shattering the entire panel. Someone had tried to disrupt visibility without destroying the device outright. Why? Rachel visited Vale's office that afternoon. His assistant, Marissa Klein, described him as Paranoid lately. Not unstable. Cautious. He stopped working late at the office, she said. Started taking encrypted backups home. Wouldn't use company servers for some projects. What projects? Rachel asked. Marissa hesitated. He didn't say specifically. But he mentioned a private contract, said it was bigger than the fraud case. Private contract. Off books. Marissa handed over a seal envelope Vale had left in his locked desk drawer with instructions. If anything happened to him, deliver it to a federal contact listed inside. Rachel opened it under controlled conditions. Inside was a handwritten note: if I'm wrong, destroy this. If I'm right, it's already too late. Attached was a printed list of alphanumeric strings, partial encryption keys, not full sequences, fragments. The digital lab called 2 hours later. The external drive contained a compressed archive labeled projectorpheus. The archive was encrypted with military-grade protocol, but metadata showed it had been modified at 8:12 p.m., 5 minutes before Vale's last phone interaction. He had been actively working on it. Rachel requested phone records. Vale's last activity wasn't a call. It was a deleted message, recovered from the device's shadow memory. The text had been sent to an unsaved number. They know. No reply. No further communication. The hotel's surveillance footage from the third-floor corridor was reviewed frame by frame. At 8:58 p.m., a figure appeared briefly at the far end of the hallway, partially obscured by a service cart parked near the elevator. The individual wore a dark baseball cap and a maintenance jacket, face angled downward. The person did not approach room 312 directly within visible range. But at 9:03 p.m., the hallway camera flickered for exactly 11 seconds. When the feed stabilized, the corridor was empty. No visible exit. No visible entry. Maintenance logs showed no scheduled repairs that evening. The hotel employed 2 night technicians. Both were accounted for. Rachel replayed the flicker sequence repeatedly. It wasn't a full outage. It was a localized interruption, deliberate signal interference, which meant preparation. Someone had studied the camera layout in advance. Inside the hotel's engineering access panel room, investigators found no obvious tampering. But a secondary junction box behind a removable ceiling tile showed fresh scuff marks. Not from hotel staff. Rachel mapped the blind spots. If someone accessed the ceiling crawl space from a maintenance closet 2 rooms down from 312, they could bypass the keycard system entirely, entering through the bathroom ventilation duct. Measurements were taken. The duct width 14 inches. Large enough, but difficult. It would require physical agility and prior knowledge. She returned to Vale's office computer. His recent browsing history included searches on advanced data obfuscation and secure whistleblower channels. He wasn't just testifying in fraud cases. He was investigating something bigger. The lab partially decrypted fragments from projectorpheus using the key fragments found in the envelope. What they revealed shifted the direction of the case entirely. Embedded within the archive were transaction logs, hundreds of them, routed through shell entities tallying to infrastructure development contracts overseas. Amounts small enough individually to avoid scrutiny, collectively exceeding $200 million. And attached to several of the transaction nodes were digital signatures belonging to medical procurement companies. Rachel read the names carefully. 2 had recently been awarded emergency government supply contracts. 1 had ties to a private defense contractor. Follow the money. That rule had ended more conspiracies than it had created. But Vale had gone further. Hidden within the encrypted folder was a subdirectory labeled Subject Index. It contained photographs, surveillance stills, individuals meeting in parking structures, lobby bars, airport lounges. 1 face appeared 3 times. A man identified as Dr. Henrik Solberg, anesthesiologist, consultant to multiple surgical equipment manufacturers. Recently contracted by a hospital network affiliated with one of the procurement companies in the transaction logs. An anesthesiologist. Rachel didn't react outwardly, but the connection was forming. Neuromuscular blockers are not easy to obtain outside regulated supply chains. Someone with hospital access. Someone with training. Someone who understood dosage. She requested travel records. Dr. Solberg had attended a medical conference in the city 2 days before Vale's death. His return flight was scheduled for 11:45 p.m. the night of the murder. Boarding scan confirmed, which meant he left after Vale's estimated time of death. But travel timelines can be misleading. Rachel Cross referenced hotel records. Solberg had not stayed at the Ashcroft. He had booked a different hotel across town. However, cell phone tower pings placed his device within a 4-block radius of the Ashcroft between 8:36 p.m. and 9:22 p.m. He claimed he had been dining alone at a restaurant. The restaurant confirmed he paid at 9:48 p.m., but could not confirm his arrival time. Rachel leaned back in her chair. Dr. Leonard Vale had texted, "They know." At 8:17 p.m. 45 minutes later, someone immobilized him and waited for his lungs to fail. The water glass, the arranged posture, the cracked screen. This wasn't an impulsive silencing. It was theatrical, controlled. The question now wasn't just who injected Vale. It was whether Solberg acted alone, because PROJSTORPHUS was not a one-person secret. And if Vale had decrypted enough to scare himself into leaving a dead man envelope, then the people involved weren't amateurs. Rachel stared at Solberg's photograph again. Clinical eyes, measured smile, hands steady enough to paralyze without hesitation. But professionals don't make noise, and Vale's death had been loud, strategically loud, which meant the injection wasn't just about stopping him. It was about sending a warning to anyone else digging. The next step wasn't arrest. It was pressure. Because if Solberg had help inside the hotel, someone who knew the crawl space, the camera timing, the structural layout, then this operation required coordination. And coordination leaves traces. Rachel requested financial audits on the Ashcroft's ownership structure. The hotel wasn't independent. It was part of a small investment group. One of the silent partners had direct holdings in a medical logistics firm listed in Vale's ORPHS archive. The pattern was tightening, but patterns can mislead, and someone this careful would expect investigators to follow the obvious thread, which raised a more dangerous possibility. What if Solberg wasn't the architect? What if he was the distraction? Because paralysis isn't the only way to silence someone quietly. And the most dangerous conspiracies aren't built on a single method. They're built on layers. Dr. Leonard Vale had uncovered one layer, and someone had decided that was enough. Dr. Henrik Solberg did not look like a man who crawled through ventilation shafts. When Detective Rachel Monroe entered the interview room, he was seated upright, hands folded neatly on the table. Calm, groomed, controlled. His attorney sat beside him, silent but alert. Solberg didn't deny being near the Ashcroft Business Hotel on the night Dr. Leonard Vale died. "I went for a walk," he said evenly. "Conference days are long. I needed air." "You walked 4 blocks in the opposite direction of your hotel," Rachel replied. "I wasn't tracking direction." His pulse never visibly shifted. Rachel placed a printed map of cell phone tower pings on the table. The timestamps were highlighted in red. 8:36 p.m. Within range of the Ashcroft. 8:51 p.m. Stationary for 7 minutes. 9:07 p.m. Signal drift toward the rear alley. 9:22 p.m. Signal moving eastbound. "That's a long walk," she said. Solberg leaned back slightly. "You're implying I killed someone." "I'm implying you were close to a man who died from a paralytic agent identical to those used in your operating rooms." The attorney intervened. "My client administers medication in licensed facilities. Suggesting otherwise without evidence is reckless." Rachel did not respond immediately. Instead, she slid a photograph across the table. A still image from Vale's encrypted ORPHEUS archive. Solberg speaking with an unidentified man in an underground parking structure. Solberg's composure shifted, subtly. "That was a professional consultation," he said. "With whom?" "I don't recall." Rachel let silence sit between them. Silence is uncomfortable for people who rely on control. Solberg eventually spoke again. "I consult for multiple medical procurement companies. If Dr. Vale was investigating financial misconduct, I have nothing to do with that." Rachel leaned forward. "You're correct. He wasn't investigating financial misconduct." Solberg's eyes flickered. He was investigating distribution irregularities in hospital-grade anesthetics. High-volume purchases routed through shell subsidiaries. Inventory discrepancies. Now the attorney stiffened. There is no evidence of that. There is, Rachel replied. We just haven't decided how public it becomes. Solberg's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Rachel shifted tactics. Dr. Vale texted someone at 8:17 p.m. They know. Who is they, doctor? Solberg's expression hardened. I wouldn't know. Interview concluded. No admission. No breakdown. But there had been a fracture. A micro-expression when the subject of anesthetic distribution was mentioned. Rachel exited the station and contacted Roland. He's not the planner, she said. He's the mechanism. Meaning, he's skilled. Precise. But he reacts when the network is mentioned. Someone above him coordinates. The investigation pivoted. Instead of focusing solely on Solberg, Rachel authorized deep dive audits into anesthetic procurement across the shell corporations linked in PROJECTORPHEUS. What emerged was not random diversion. It was systematic siphoning. Neuromuscular blockers purchased in bulk under hospital allocations were being rerouted in small quantities through logistics subsidiaries tied to the Ashcroft's parent investment group. Medical-grade paralytics disappearing into private channels. Not enough to trigger federal scrutiny, enough to serve another purpose. Cross, referencing unsolved deaths in the last 18 months, revealed a disturbing pattern. 3 cases. 3 cities. Victims found in controlled environments. Hotel rooms, executive apartments, private offices. All ruled cardiac arrest. All with minimal signs of struggle. All individuals connected to regulatory or compliance roles in corporate oversight. Rachel reopened those files. In one case, a compliance auditor reviewing overseas infrastructure bids died alone in a serviced apartment. No autopsy toxicology panel had included neuromuscular agents. In another, a financial investigator collapsed in a conference suite the night before testifying before a board inquiry. Clean scenes. Arranged bodies. Quiet deaths. She felt the case expanding beyond a single homicide. This wasn't about silencing Vale alone. This was a template. Solberg's travel history was analyzed over the past year. He had attended conferences in each city where the unexplained deaths occurred. Within 48 hours of the incidents. Not enough for direct indictment. Enough for probability. Rachel returned to the Ashcroft. This time she focused not on room 3-12, but on the building's infrastructure. The crawlspace entry point showed trace fibers caught on a rough metal edge, dark synthetic material. Lab results matched the fiber composition to a common industrial maintenance jacket brand used by multiple service contractors. Not conclusive. But the hotel's maintenance vendor records revealed something interesting. One subcontractor had been rotated out 3 months earlier after a billing dispute. That subcontractor's owner had previously been employed by a logistics firm connected to one of the anesthetic procurement shell companies. Connections tightening. Rachel obtained financial disclosures from the Ashcroft's investment group. One silent partner's name appeared repeatedly in Vale's encrypted notes. Not directly, but referenced through code initials, CM. Corporate filings identified a controlling shareholder, Conrad Mercer. Mercer had no criminal record. Philanthropist. Investor. Major stakeholder in medical supply chains. Rachel studied Mercer's public profile. He funded hospital wings. Sponsored medical research conferences. Donated to regulatory oversight committees. Influence without visibility. And 2 weeks before Vale's death, Mercer had quietly withdrawn a significant investment stake from one of the Shell subsidiaries, flagged in PROJECTORPHEUS. As if anticipating exposure, Rachel requested a warrant for Mercer's financial communications. Approval would take time. Time she wasn't certain they had. Because if Vale had been eliminated as part of a systematic silencing operation, then others currently investigating ORPHUS linked contracts might be at risk. She contacted federal regulatory agencies discreetly. One name surfaced, Allison Grant, Senior Compliance Auditor reviewing cross-border medical supply allocations. Grant had flagged anomalies similar to Vale's findings, and she was scheduled to present her internal report in 5 days. Rachel called her directly. "Have you experienced anything unusual?" she asked. Grant hesitated. "There was someone outside my apartment last week. Could have been nothing. And my work files were accessed remotely, but IT said it was a glitch. Stop working from home," Rachel said. And do not stay alone. Silence. Is this about Leonard Vale? Grant asked quietly. Wes. Rachel hung up and stared at the caseboard. Solberg was a skilled administrator of paralysis. Mercer controlled logistics and funding. The Ashcroft provided controlled environments. But none of that explained the theatrical staging, the glass of water, the arranged posture. That detail felt personal, almost ritualistic. She revisited crime scene photos again. The water glass wasn't random. Condensation rings indicated it had been placed after Vale was immobilized. Why place water within reach of someone who couldn't move? Unless it was symbolic. Control. Watching someone unable to reach what they need. Rachel requested surveillance footage from surrounding buildings, not just the Ashcroft. Across the alley, a parking garage camera captured a partial silhouette exiting a side service door at 9:26 p.m. The figure walked with measured pace. Not hurried. A vehicle pulled up seconds later, black sedan, tinted windows. License plate partially obscured. The vehicle was registered to a fleet leasing company frequently used by Mercer's corporate offices. Rachel exhaled slowly. This wasn't improvisation. It was choreography, and if Mercer believed Vale's death would halt exposure of ORPHEUS, he had underestimated the redundancy of forensic investigation. Because Vale hadn't completed decryption alone, lab technicians reported progress on PROJCTORPHEUS. Hidden within a secondary encrypted partition was a time-stamped auto-upload configuration, scheduled to transmit data to an external secure server if the drive remained inactive for 72 hours. Vale had anticipated interruption. The transmission window had already passed, which meant somewhere, a secure server now held the complete archive. Rachel checked the timestamp. Upload initiated 11:58 p.m., the night of Vale's death. Whoever killed him believed they had contained the leak. They hadn't. But if Mercer's network realized the data had escaped, the response would escalate. Rachel's phone vibrated. Unlisted number. She answered without speaking. A male voice, calm, controlled. You're looking in the wrong direction, detective. Click. Call terminated. No traceable ID. She stood still for several seconds. Threat, warning, or misdirection. The case was no longer contained within a single jurisdiction. It was systemic, and the people orchestrating paralysis had just realized someone was pushing back. The question now wasn't whether Conrad Mercer ordered Leonard Vale's death. It was how many others had already suffocated quietly under the same method, and whether the next target was already marked. The call lasted 4 seconds, long enough to confirm confidence, short enough to avoid trace triangulation. You're looking in the wrong direction, detective. No distortion. No panic. No urgency. Measured. Which meant whoever made the call believed they were insulated. Detective Rachel Monroe did not log it immediately. Instead, she replayed it in her memory. Tone, cadence, breath, spacing. The voice carried age but not frailty. Educated. Controlled. Not hurried. Not Solberg. Solberg's voice carried clinical detachment but also subtle defensiveness. The caller had none. This was someone accustomed to directing outcomes. Rachel requested tower data from her own device at the time of the call. The signal bounced through a masked VoIP relay routed offshore. Layered encryption designed to fragment origin tracing. Professional counter, surveillance. That eliminated impulsive actors. The secure server holding Vale's uploaded ORPHEUS archive, located by the digital forensics team through metadata breadcrumbs embedded in the partial decryption logs. Vale had used a decentralized storage protocol, fragments distributed across multiple nodes, reassembled only through a specific key sequence. The final node was registered under a nonprofit data privacy foundation. Board member Conrad Mercer. Rachel allowed herself a slow breath. He hadn't just invested in medical supply chains. He had funded the very infrastructure Vale used to hide the evidence. That meant one of two things. 1. Mercer didn't know Vale used the network. 2. Mercer knew and believed he could intercept it. The digital team confirmed the upload completed successfully before any remote wipe attempt could be initiated. There had been an attempt, at 12:06 a.m., to corrupt the node cluster. Too late. Whoever monitored Vale's activity realized the archive had transmitted, which explained the phone call. Pressure, intimidation, redirection. Rachel expanded the timeline again. If Mercer's network was aware of the upload by 12:06 a.m., then someone was monitoring Vale's device or the Ashcroft's network in real time. Hotel IT logs were subpoenaed. Between 7:55 p.m. and 9:30 p.m. on the night of the murder, there had been unusual outbound data pings from a concealed router node embedded within the building's internal infrastructure, not guessed Wi-Fi hardline, installed during a network upgrade 18 months prior. The contractor who performed that upgrade traced back, again, to a subsidiary linked to Mercer's investment portfolio. The Ashcroft wasn't just a venue. It was a controlled site, a location designed for quiet interventions. Rachel reopened the files of the 3 previous unexplained deaths. All had occurred in properties owned by investment groups partially tied to Mercer's holdings. Different cities. Same structural upgrades. Same silent router installations. Same camera blind spots. She assembled a visual overlay map. 4 cities. 4 deaths. 4 Mercer-linked properties. The pattern was no longer circumstantial. It was architectural. Meanwhile, Allison Grant, the compliance auditor Rachel had warned, agreed to meet in person at a federal building under protective detail. Grant arrived pale but composed. "I ran deeper procurement audits after Leonard died," she said. "There are shipment discrepancies involving anesthetic agents. Small allocations diverted before reaching hospital inventories." "Destination?" Rachel asked. Grant slid a tablet across the table. "Private holding warehouses registered under shell logistics firms. Those firms dissolve within months. The quantities are too small individually to trigger DEA alarms." "How many shipments?" 30, 2 over 18 months. Rachel calculated silently. Enough for far more than 4 victims. "Why would a logistics investor need paralytics?" Grant asked quietly. Rachel didn't answer directly. "Because they're clean," she said instead. "No gunshot. No obvious trauma. Just a heart that stops." Grant swallowed. "Are you saying Leonard was part of a list?" "I'm saying Leonard may have interrupted a system." 2 hours later, federal warrants were finally approved for financial and communication records tied to Conrad Mercer and his subsidiaries. Initial data pulls revealed encrypted correspondence between Mercer and a private security consultancy named Helix Risk Solutions. Helix had no public website, no listed employees, but its registered director had prior employment in intelligence logistics. Rachel requested deeper access. Helix invoices labeled "Site Preparation" appeared in the financial ledgers of each Mercer-linked property where unexplained deaths had occurred. Site preparation for what? Ventilation access modifications, camera recalibration, network reinforcement, infrastructure adjustments that could facilitate undetected entry and surveillance. Rachel leaned over the evidence board. Solberg was the injector. Helix was the facilitator. Mercer was the financier. But there was still a missing element: the staging, the water glass, the arrangement of the bodies. Helix operations would prioritize efficiency, not symbolism. Someone else shaped the aftermath. An internal message thread recovered from Mercer's assistant's email cache referenced presentation consistency, not execution. Presentation. Rachel froze on that phrase. Presentation consistency across multiple incidents, meaning the staging was deliberate and standardized. She revisited crime scene photographs from the prior 3 deaths. In each case, a drink within reach. Lighting left on. Body positioned upright if possible. No visible struggle, as if the victim had simply paused mid-thought. A tableau of control. Rachel considered psychology. The killer wasn't merely eliminating threats. They were demonstrating dominance, leaving victims in positions of composure they could not control. Paralysis. Awareness. Helplessness. The water glass wasn't hydration. It was proximity to survival. Denied. Her phone vibrated again. "A known number," she answered. Silence for 3 seconds. Then a single sentence. "Curiosity is a dangerous habit." Different voice. Lower. Deliberate modulation. Call ended. This wasn't panic. It was escalation. Rachel immediately initiated trace protocols, but again the routing fractured across international nodes. Helix. Professional grade obfuscation. She made a decision. Instead of continuing quietly, she authorized controlled media leakage. Not about Mercer directly, but about the existence of a City pattern involving unexplained executive deaths under review. Within hours, financial news outlets began circulating speculation. Market response was immediate. Shares of two Mercer-linked medical procurement firms dipped sharply. Pressure applied. By evening, Helix Risk Solutions registered director attempted to board a flight out of the country. Airport security detained him under federal request. His name was Daniel Kessler, former logistics coordinator for overseas intelligence operations. In interrogation, Kessler denied operational involvement in any homicide. "We secure properties," he said. "We optimize surveillance." "For what purpose?" Rachel asked. "Client discretion." "Did you optimize room 312 at the Ashcroft?" Kessler paused. "Security upgrades were requested." "By whom?" "Investment board. Conrad Mercer." Kessler did not respond verbally, but silence can be confirmation. Rachel shifted. "Who handles presentation?" Kessler's composure cracked, just slightly. "I don't know what you mean. You prepare the room, you disable the cameras, you provide access, but someone stays after. Someone arranges the scene." Silence again. Rachel leaned closer. "Who watches them suffocate?" Kessler's jaw tightened. "I never saw that." Not denial. Limitation. He wasn't present for the final act, which meant the injector, Solberg, likely administered the paralytic. Helix enabled access. But Mercer. Rachel reviewed Mercer's calendar logs obtained through the warrant. On the nights of all 4 deaths, Mercer had private meetings blocked out under vague labels. Board review. Time windows aligned precisely with estimated death windows, and Mercer's phone location data placed him within 1 mile of each site during those times. He wasn't remote. He was nearby. Rachel felt the structure of the case solidifying. Mercer didn't just fund. He attended, which reframed the staging entirely. The water glass, the upright posture, the controlled lighting. It wasn't operational necessity. It was personal ritual. A man who built influence through invisible leverage. A man who believed himself untouchable. Watching compliance officers and auditors lose breath while seated in controlled calm, demonstrating that resistance would be quiet and dignified. Until it wasn't. Rachel authorized a warrant for Mercer's immediate detention on conspiracy charges pending homicide indictment. But before it could be executed, an alert came through. Allison Grant, the auditor, had not arrived home. Her protective detail reported losing visual contact for 3 minutes during a parking structure transfer. Her vehicle was found abandoned. Engine running, driver's door open, no signs of struggle, no blood. Rachel closed her eyes briefly. The pattern was repeating. Paralysis doesn't require visible violence. And Mercer's network had just decided containment was no longer enough. This time, they weren't staging quiet dignity. They were accelerating. And acceleration makes mistakes. Allison Grant's car was still idling when patrol units arrived. Headlights on. Driver's door open. Briefcase on the passenger seat. No shattered glass. No tire marks. No witnesses reporting a struggle. The protective detail officer assigned to her swore the lapse lasted less than 3 minutes. 3 minutes was enough. The parking structure security cameras had experienced a routine buffering error between 6:14 p.m. and 6:18 p.m. Rachel did not need to ask who maintained that system. Helix Risk Solutions had installed it 9 months earlier under a subcontract. Grant's phone was recovered from the vehicle floor. Screen cracked. Not shattered. Cracked at a precise central point. The same fracture pattern as Leonard Vale's laptop. Controlled pressure. A signature. Rachel crouched beside the vehicle. There were faint drag marks on the concrete. Subtle scuffs consistent with shoes being repositioned, not with a struggle. If Grant had been injected inside the vehicle, she would have lost voluntary movement within 90 seconds. Conscious. Unable to resist. Rachel's jaw tightened. Check ventilation access. She instructed. The parking structure's ceiling panels were inspected. One panel near Grant's parking space showed fresh displacement. A narrow crawl space ran above the row. Access from the adjacent stairwell. Prepared in advance. They hadn't grabbed her violently. They had immobilized her silently, which meant she was likely still alive. For now. Rachel ordered roadblock alerts and traffic camera sweeps for vehicles leaving the structure between 16:10 and 6:25 p.m. A black sedan. Fleet leased. Exited at 16:19 p.m. Same partial plate sequence as the vehicle seen leaving the Ashcroft alley after Vale's death. Registered to a logistics holding company tied to Mercer's corporate offices. Rachel didn't hesitate. Pull Mercer in now. Federal agents executed the detention warrant at Mercer's downtown office suite. He did not resist. He did not appear surprised. He was escorted into interrogation just before 8:00 p.m. Conrad Mercer carried himself with composure refined by decades of boardrooms and closed-door negotiations. Silver hair, tailored suit, calm gaze. "Detective Monroe," he said as she entered. "I was told this concerns a misunderstanding." Rachel remained standing. "Allison Grant is missing." The Mercer's expression remained neutral. "I'm not familiar with the name. She's a compliance auditor reviewing anesthetic distribution tied to your subsidiaries." A slight pause. "I oversee dozens of subsidiaries." Rachel placed crime scene photographs from Vale's hotel room on the table, then photos from the previous 3 unexplained deaths, then the image of Grant's abandoned vehicle. "You build systems," she said. "You prepare sites. You reroute medical-grade paralytics. You eliminate regulatory threats." Mercer folded his hands. "That is an extraordinary accusation." Rachel leaned forward. "You were within 1 mile of every victim at the estimated time of death. Coincidence?" "You fund Helix Risk Solutions. Security consultation is standard practice. You withdrew capital from Shell subsidiaries days before Vale decrypted ORP use. Portfolio adjustment. You were near Grant tonight." Mercer's eyes hardened. "The first genuine shift. I was at a charity function. We have your location data." Silence. Rachel studied him. "You watch them," she said quietly. He did not respond. "You immobilize them. You sit in the room. You place water just out of reach." A flicker. Not denial. Recognition. Rachel lowered her voice. "Where is she?" Mercer's jaw tightened slightly. "You're constructing a narrative because it comforts you." Rachel exhaled slowly. "Daniel Kessler is in custody. Helix's infrastructure trail is mapped. Solberg's procurement history is documented. Your vehicles are flagged. This system is collapsing." Mercer tilted his head. "You assume this is about concealment." "It's about control," Rachel replied. A faint smile appeared. "You're close. Not to guilt, to motive." Rachel shifted strategy. "Vale didn't just upload ORPHUS," she said. "He embedded fail-safes. Dead man triggers. If Allison Grant isn't recovered safely, the archive goes public." Mercer's gaze sharpened. This time, the reaction was measurable. "You're bluffing." Rachel held his eyes. "Test me." Silence stretched. Then Mercer leaned back slowly. "You think I orchestrated murder to hide procurement discrepancies?" he asked. "I think you built leverage," Rachel said. "You siphoned small quantities of paralytics into private control. You eliminated individuals who threatened structural stability of your investments." Mercer's composure returned. "You misunderstand leverage." Rachel waited. "Leverage isn't about elimination," he continued. "It's about demonstration." There it was. Demonstration. "You staged them," Rachel said. "Not to silence them. To send a message to others." Mercer didn't deny it. Instead, he asked, "Has Dr. Vale's archive been fully decrypted?" Rachel didn't answer. His gaze sharpened further. "You don't know how much he uncovered?" Mercer said quietly. "Which means you don't know what you're protecting." Rachel leaned in. "I know enough." Mercer's expression changed. Not fear, not panic. Calculation. "If Ms. Grant is alive," he said carefully, "her survival depends on your discretion." Rachel's pulse slowed. "You don't get to negotiate. You misunderstand again." Mercer replied. "This isn't negotiation. It's containment." Before Rachel could respond, her phone vibrated. Secure line. She stepped outside the room. Federal surveillance units had tracked the black sedan to an industrial storage facility 30 miles outside the city. Registered under a dissolved logistics subsidiary, thermal imaging detected heat signatures inside. At least 3 individuals. One motionless. Rachel didn't wait. She authorized tactical entry. Inside the interrogation room, Mercer remained seated alone. He closed his eyes briefly. not in prayer. In assessment. 45 minutes later, tactical teams breached the facility. 2 Helix operatives were apprehended. Dr. Henrik Solberg was present. Allison Grant was found restrained to a chair, conscious, paralyzed. An IV line connected to a drip containing diluted neuromuscular blocker. A glass of water sat on a table 2 feet from her, within sight, out of reach. The room lighting was dimmed deliberately. She had been placed upright, staged. Rachel arrived minutes after extraction. Grant's breathing was shallow but stable as emergency medics administered reversal agents. Her eyes tracked movement, fully aware. Rachel stood over her. "You're safe," she said. Grant blinked once, the only movement she could manage. Back at headquarters, Solberg finally spoke. "You don't understand what he's preventing," he said. "Who?" Rachel asked. Solberg's voice trembled for the first time. "Mercer doesn't eliminate people to hide fraud. He eliminates volatility." Rachel stared at him. "ORPHUS isn't just about anesthetics," Solberg continued. "It's about supply chain manipulation during crisis events, redirecting medical shortages, creating artificial scarcity to inflate contract leverage." Rachel felt the case expand again. Vail found distribution forecasts tied to future emergency declarations. Solberg said, "Pandemic simulations, regional destabilization modeling, engineered shortages, manufactured crisis, profit multiplied through controlled scarcity." Compliance officers weren't obstacles. They were unpredictable variables. Mercer removed unpredictability by demonstration. Rachel returned to the interrogation room. Mercer looked up as she entered. "Allison Grant is alive," she said. A flicker of irritation. "Subtle. You accelerated," she added. "And acceleration creates exposure." The Mercer regarded her calmly. "You think this ends with my arrest?" Rachel didn't answer. "You've exposed a system that extends far beyond me," Mercer said quietly. "You remove one node. Another compensates." Rachel leaned forward. "Not if the archive goes public." For the first time, Mercer's confidence wavered. Because he knew something she now understood, ORPHUS wasn't a murder operation. It was a leverage engine. And the killings were quality control. Rachel placed a single document on the table. A federal indictment draft. Conspiracy to commit murder, kidnapping, racketeering, medical supply diversion. Mercer studied it, then looked up. "You've destabilized more than you realize," he said. Rachel's voice was steady. "No, I've made it visible." Outside the interrogation room, federal agents prepared formal arrest processing. Inside, Mercer remained composed. But composure fractures when systems fail. And his system had just been breached. What remained uncertain was how many other nodes still operated beyond immediate reach. Because leverage engines don't collapse quietly. They adapt. And when they adapt, they often retaliate. Conrad Mercer was processed at 02:14 a.m., no resistance, no raised voice, no visible panic. His fingerprints were taken, mugshot captured, personal effects cataloged, watch, cufflinks, wallet, encrypted phone. He requested one call. It was denied pending federal coordination. By morning, the news cycle detonated. Medical supply magnate arrested in multi-city death conspiracy. Markets reacted first. Shares of 3 Mercer-linked medical procurement firms plunged at opening bell. Trading volatility triggered automatic halts. Analysts scrambled to reinterpret what had previously been categorized as aggressive expansion strategy. Now it had a different label: artificial scarcity. Behind closed doors, federal agencies shifted posture. If ORPHUS contained credible projections of engineered supply shortages tied to emergency declarations, then the implications extended beyond homicide. It meant manipulation of public health infrastructure, and that meant motive far larger than silencing auditors. Detective Rachel Monroe did not celebrate, because systems that generate leverage at scale are never dependent on one architect. They are distributed by design. Allison Grant remained under medical supervision. The paralytic reversal had been administered in time, but the psychological impact lingered. She had been conscious throughout, aware of the IV drip, aware of the water glass placed deliberately in view. She gave her statement carefully. "He told me I wouldn't die," she said quietly. "He said I would understand." "Who?" Rachel asked. "Mercer." Rachel stilled. "You saw him," she pressed. Grant nodded faintly. He stood near the doorway. He said volatility disguises necessary systems, that I was becoming volatility, not just financier, not just nearby. Present. Rachel documented every word. Meanwhile, digital forensics completed deeper reconstruction of PRJCTORPHEUS. The archive was more complex than initially assessed. It contained predictive models, epidemiological simulations cross-referenced with supply chain choke points, artificial procurement slowdowns timed against projected emergency declarations. In short, create shortage, amplify panic, secure emergency contracts at inflated margins, stabilize market position through controlled release. A feedback loop. The deaths were not primarily about concealment. They were about deterrence. A demonstration to internal and external auditors that interference would be neutralized quietly. Rachel assembled an interagency briefing. She presented the timeline: 4 prior unexplained deaths, architectural similarities, Helix infrastructure installations, Solberg's procurement diversions, Mercer's physical proximity, the staged paralysis, the water glass. She paused at that detail. Why the water? A federal prosecutor asked. Symbolism. Rachel replied. Control within sight. The room was silent. By afternoon, additional arrests were made. 2 Helix operatives, 1 logistics coordinator, and a mid-level procurement officer. But the more data surfaced, the clearer the structure became. Mercer had insulated himself through compartmentalization. Helix handled site control. Solberg handled injection. Logistics handled diversion. Executives signed contracts unaware of tactical enforcement. No one except Mercer sat in every room, which made his presence at Grant's abduction significant. It broke his own compartmentalization model. Rachel returned to interrogation. Mercer looked fatigued for the first time, not physically, structurally. You attended, she said. I observe, he replied. You watch them lose air. He did not respond. Why be present? She pressed. Mercer's eyes lifted slowly. Because distance erodes clarity. Rachel studied him. You needed to see control. He gave the smallest nod. You remove volatility, he said quietly. And systems remain stable. By suffocating people. By preventing collapse. Rachel leaned forward. You manufacture collapse to profit from prevention. For the first time, irritation flared. You think governments don't do the same? Mercer asked. Controlled scarcity stabilizes markets. Markets stabilize societies. Rachel's voice hardened. You don't get to redefine murder as macroeconomics. Mercer's composure thinned. Veil would have destabilized supply networks globally. Grant would have triggered regulatory paralysis. You see corruption. I see systemic resilience. Rachel stood. You see yourself as necessary. Mercer didn't deny it. Outside the room, prosecutors finalized formal charges. Federal racketeering statutes expanded the scope beyond state homicide. But before Mercer could be transferred to federal custody, an alert came through. One of the smaller subsidiaries flagged in ORPHEUS had initiated an emergency data purge. Remote servers located overseas began wiping archives. Helix's remaining digital infrastructure was activating contingency protocols. Rachel immediately authorized cyber intervention requests. But distributed systems are built to survive node loss. Mercer watched her receive the alert. Adaptation, he said softly. Rachel met his gaze. Exposure, she corrected. Within hours, the ORPHEUS archive was transmitted securely to multiple oversight bodies and investigative journalists under sealed embargo. Redundancy. If one node attempted erasure, others would release. Mercer's eyes tracked the movement in the room. Agents coordinating, prosecutors drafting. You've made it irreversible, he said. Yes, Rachel replied. For a moment, something shifted in him. Not regret, recognition. The leverage engine depended on opacity. Transparency destabilized it, but destabilization carries consequences. By evening, federal analysts identified irregular trading spikes in commodities linked to medical supplies, as if actors aware of ORPHES exposure were repositioning assets rapidly. Someone else was moving. Mercer had been one architect. Not the only one. Rachel reviewed Helix's financial backups again. There were recurring payments from an offshore holding group not directly tied to Mercer. Name obscured through layered shells. But one recurrent identifier appeared in encrypted message headers. Consortium. not a company, a coalition. If Mercer was one node in a broader supply manipulation network, his arrest might not dismantle the system. It might trigger acceleration. Late that night, as Mercer was escorted toward federal transport, he paused beside Rachel. "You believe this ends with indictment?" he said quietly. "It ends with accountability," she replied. He studied her. "You've exposed volatility." She held his gaze. "Good." Mercer allowed himself a faint exhale. "You'll learn," he said, "that volatility rarely disappears. It redistributes." He was placed into the transport vehicle. Doors closed, escorted away. Rachel stood still for several seconds. The facility raid had saved Allison Grant. The arrests had fractured Helix. The ORPHUS archive was disseminated. But systems that manipulate scarcity rarely collapse overnight. They mutate. She returned to the evidence board. 4 prior deaths, 1 attempted, 1 architect detained, and 1 encrypted header still unresolved consortium. Because when leverage operates across borders, individual arrests are disruption, not dismantlement. And somewhere beyond immediate jurisdiction, someone else was calculating exposure, losses, and necessary correction. The water glass had been a symbol of control. But control shifts. And when it does, those who lose often try to reclaim it, quickly. The question was not whether retaliation would come. It was how visible it would be. Exposure does not create silence. It creates reaction. Within 48 hours of Conrad Mercer's arrest, financial regulators across 3 countries initiated emergency reviews of medical procurement contracts tied to entities named in PROJCTORPHEUS. Trading algorithms adjusted, emergency board meetings convened, legal teams mobilized, and quietly, almost invisibly, capital began to move. Detective Rachel Monroe sat in a dim conference room reviewing an interagency intelligence summary compiled overnight. Title: Consortium Activity Indicators. The encrypted header found in Helix correspondence had not been a flourish. It was operational shorthand, used across at least 12 cross-border financial transfers routed through layered holding groups. Mercer was not the architect. He was a regional executor. The consortium appeared to be a distributed alliance of investment strategists specializing in crisis, leveraged commodities, pharmaceuticals, energy, logistics infrastructure. Medical scarcity was one vertical, not the only one. Rachel traced the ORPHUS forecasting model again. It predicted not just supply shortages, but public reaction thresholds, social unrest indices, regulatory lag periods, media saturation cycles. The models weren't built for one emergency. They were built for recurring opportunity, which reframed the murders again. Vale and the others hadn't simply uncovered diversion. They had identified predictive manipulation, and that threatened future profit cycles. A knock on the conference room door interrupted her. Roland entered with an update. 2 Helix accounts just transferred residual balances to offshore wallets, he said. Same routing cluster. Different endpoint. Consortium? She asked. Likely. Rachel nodded slowly. Freeze what you can. Track the rest. Across town, federal prosecutors prepared Mercer's preliminary hearing. Bail was denied due to flight risk and severity of charges. His legal team pivoted immediately, not toward denial, but toward strategic delay. Delay creates uncertainty. Uncertainty creates negotiation windows. Rachel requested expanded warrants for communications tied to the consortium, linked routing clusters. Approval would require federal intelligence clearance due to international jurisdiction overlap. Time again became variable. Meanwhile, digital forensics uncovered something new inside the ORPHUS archive. A secondary predictive model labeled Event Cascade. Unlike the anesthetic procurement simulations, this model mapped out cascading shortages triggered by targeted media amplification. Scenario example: Phase 1 – Controlled leak of regional supply disruption. Phase 2 – Media amplification. Phase 3 – Panic procurement by institutions. Phase 4 – Artificial price inflation. Phase 5 – Emergency declaration. Phase 6 – Contract consolidation. Rachel stared at the flow chart. The murders were not just deterrence. They were maintenance, preventing interference with event cascade activation cycles. If Vale had accessed this layer before his death, the timeline made sense. He wasn't just exposing past manipulation. He was interrupting future operations. Rachel's phone buzzed. Allison Grant again. She was stable enough to speak privately. He said something else. Grant whispered. Who? Rachel asked. Mercer. Before I lost movement. Rachel listened carefully. He said, You audit numbers. We audit survival. Rachel closed her eyes briefly. Survival framing. Moral reframing to justify systemic coercion. Classic cognitive restructuring of power abuse. You weren't volatility. Rachel said quietly. You were accountability. Grant exhaled shakily. I think he believed what he said. Rachel didn't disagree. Belief makes systems more dangerous, because belief sustains them even under exposure. Hours later, the first retaliation attempt occurred. Not violent, not overt. A coordinated disinformation campaign launched across financial forums and fringe media platforms. Claims that ORPHEUS documents were fabricated. Allegations that Vail had been under investigation for misconduct. Anonymous sources questioning Rachel's investigative integrity. Standard destabilization tactic. Undermine credibility. Create doubt. Rachel expected it. What she didn't expect was the speed, which meant the consortium had a communications arm pre-positioned. This was not reactive chaos. It was contingency planning. She authorized public release of limited, verified portions of the Oleus archive, enough to establish authenticity without compromising ongoing prosecution. Transparency as countermeasure. Markets reacted again. This time more sharply. 2 overseas procurement conglomerates saw sudden executive resignations. One logistics firm dissolved abruptly. Assets were shifting rapidly. The system was shedding skin. Late that evening, federal intelligence analysts delivered a preliminary profile on potential consortium leadership nodes. 3 primary figures surfaced repeatedly in overlapping financial routing clusters. None had direct documented contact with Mercer. All operated through investment consortiums specializing in distressed asset acquisition during crisis periods. One name stood out. Elena Varga, dual citizenship, energy logistics magnate, board member in multiple emergency infrastructure councils. Her portfolio intersected with Mercer's in 2 prior investment cycles. Rachel studied Varga's timeline. During 2 of the 4 prior unexplained deaths, Varga had been in the same cities, officially attending infrastructure summits. Coincidence remained plausible, but probability was narrowing. Rachel requested travel data correlation. Within an hour, confirmation arrived. Varga's private jet flight paths overlapped within a 50-mile radius of each death site within 12 hours of the estimated time of death. Not proof, but pattern. If Mercer was a regional executor within medical verticals, Varga could represent cross-vertical coordination. The consortium was not a shadow cult. It was an economic strategy network. Kill volatility. Preserve leverage. Exploit disruption. Rachel returned to Mercer's detention holding area. He looked different now. Not broken, but calculating under constraint. You're not the top layer, she said without preamble. Mercer gave a faint, tired smile. You're learning. Elena Varga, Rachel said. A pause, subtle but present. She believes in energy stability. Mercer replied carefully. She believes in leverage. He didn't deny it. Rachel stepped closer. You're going to federal court. Racketeering, homicide conspiracy, kidnapping. Cooperation adjusts sentence and outcomes. Mercer studied her. You think they'll protect you if you escalate this? I don't need protection. Rachel said, I need evidence. Mercer's voice lowered. The consortium is not centralized. Remove me. Someone else optimizes medical verticals. Remove Varga, energy recalibrates elsewhere. You built a distributed kill switch economy, Rachel said. We built resilience, Mercer corrected. Rachel let silence settle again. Then she shifted. Vail left more than ORPHEUS. Mercer's eyes flicked up. He left predictive timestamps. She continued. Next projected activation window is in 6 weeks. Regional respiratory outbreak modeling. Mercer's expression sharpened. That model is theoretical. Is it? Rachel held his gaze. If something triggers in 6 weeks, supply disruption, panic amplification. We trace it back through every node. For the first time, uncertainty surfaced clearly in Mercer's face. Because distributed systems rely on unpredictability to exploit reaction. Preemptive exposure disrupts timing. Rachel stood upright. You built control through paralysis, she said. Now, you're exposed to volatility. She turned to leave. Mercer's voice followed her. You've destabilized markets already. When shortages spike, when hospitals strain, they won't blame a consortium. Rachel paused at the doorway. They'll blame accountability. She exited without looking back. Outside, Roland waited. You think Varga moves? He asked. She calculates. Rachel replied. If she accelerates, she exposes. And if she waits, she adapts. Roland nodded. So what's next? Rachel looked at the board again. Mercer in custody. Helix fractured, or PHUS public in part. Consortium node identified. Pressure all verticals simultaneously, she said. Energy, logistics, medical. Force movement before activation window. Because leverage networks depend on timing. Disrupt timing and control fractures. But timing cuts both ways. 6 weeks. That was the projected window in ORPHUS. If the consortium believed the model was compromised, they might trigger early, or pivot entirely, or their path created risk. And risk generates volatility. The same volatility Mercer believed he was eliminating. Rachel understood something clearly now. This wasn't just about solving a murder. It was about intercepting a strategy. And strategies rarely surrender without counter-strategy. Somewhere Elena Varga was reviewing exposure metrics and deciding whether to retreat or to demonstrate that Mercer had not been acting alone. Elena Varga did not issue statements. She issued adjustments. Within 72 hours of Mercer's detention and the partial ORPHUS disclosure, 3 energy infrastructure funds quietly rebalanced portfolios away from medical, adjacent commodities. 2 logistics conglomerates announced internal compliance reviews. A pharmaceutical distributor suspended forward contract projections citing market uncertainty. Surface level retreat. But beneath that movement, analysts detected something else. Acceleration in a different sector. Respiratory equipment futures. Industrial oxygen supply chains. Rachel stood before a live data feed wall in the Federal Operations Center. 6-week window, she said. What if they don't abandon it? Roland crossed his arms. They shift vertical emphasis. The event cascade model in ORPHUS projected a regional respiratory outbreak, not necessarily manufactured biologically, but amplified through supply bottlenecks and panic cycles. It didn't require creating illness. It required amplifying scarcity. Rachel traced oxygen production facilities mapped in the archive. 3 major plants supplied over 60% of regional hospital-grade oxygen. 2 were partially owned by energy infrastructure funds tied indirectly to Varga's portfolio. The third relied on transport logistics subsidiaries previously linked to Mercer. Choke points, Rachel murmured. If transportation slowed by even 12% during peak respiratory demand, hospitals would trigger emergency procurement protocols. Emergency protocols meant expedited contracts. Expedited contracts meant price elasticity. Leverage. She turned to the interagency team. Preemptively audit oxygen transport routes. Freeze discretionary diversions. Increase redundancy visibility. Federal regulators moved quickly. Publicly, it appeared as proactive preparedness. Privately, it was containment. Hours later, an encrypted message surfaced in a monitored Helix channel, one not yet fully scrubbed. Single line. Node M compromised. Vertical shift to E. Node M. Mercer. Vertical shift to E. Energy. Rachel felt the pattern solidify. They weren't abandoning the strategy. They were redistributing it. Elena Varga had chosen acceleration over retreat. Late that evening, a controlled leak began circulating on fringe social platforms. Industrial accident at major oxygen production facility. A pending supply shortage. Insider warns of transportation delays. The claims were unverified, but they were designed to trigger institutional overreaction. Hospitals began placing precautionary orders. Supply strain increased, exactly as modeled. Rachel authorized coordinated public communication through verified health agencies denying disruption. But denial alone doesn't neutralize panic. Transparency does. She recommended real-time production dashboards be made public. Oxygen plant outputs, delivery routes, capacity buffers. Reluctantly, corporate boards complied under regulatory pressure. Live transparency flattened panic curves. The event cascade model depended on opacity between rumor and verification. Rachel had shortened that gap. Midnight. Her secure line rang. Unknown, encrypted. She answered. Elena Varga. The voice said calmly. No distortion. No hesitation. You're proactive. Varga continued. Impressive. Rachel remained silent. You've reduced amplification velocity, Varga said. But you misunderstand scale. This is about oxygen now. Rachel asked evenly. It's about stability, Varga replied. Mercer believed in demonstration. I believe in calibration. Rachel listened carefully. Calibration of what? She asked. Response thresholds. Rachel didn't blink. You engineer strain to observe reaction, she said. Governments do the same in war games. Varga replied. We simulate stress to strengthen resilience. You suffocate auditors. A pause. Mercer's methods were inefficient. Varga said coolly. They created noise. Rachel caught the implication. You didn't approve. Approval is decentralized. There it was again. Distributed architecture. Rachel shifted. You're accelerating because ORPHU's exposure threatens timing. Exposure alters tactics. Varga corrected. Not objectives. Rachel leaned slightly against the desk. You shift to energy verticals. Oxygen transport. You create perceived scarcity to trigger emergency leverage. Perception drives markets, Varga said, and people die when oxygen shortages occur. Another pause. Shortages are rarely absolute. Varga replied. They are redistributions. Redistribution. Rachel recognized the linguistic reframing. You're relocating life support to maximize margin, she said flatly. Varga's tone cooled. You're dramatizing. Rachel didn't respond emotionally. Your routing clusters are mapped, she said instead. Financial transfers tied to consortium nodes are flagged. Emergency dashboards are live. Panic curves are flattening. Temporary. Varga replied. Rachel considered her next move carefully. ORPHUS includes predictive timestamp logs, she said. Next projected activation in 6 weeks. We've publicly disclosed that window. Silence on the line. Exposure of timing reduces exploitability. You believe visibility deters leverage. Varga said quietly. It destabilizes it. Rachel answered. Varga's voice shifted, slightly sharper. Destabilization invites chaos. No, Rachel said. It invites accountability. A longer silence. Then Varga spoke again. Mercer attended interventions because he needed affirmation of control. I do not. Where are you now? Rachel asked. A faint exhale. Already recalibrating. The line went dead. Rachel stood still. Varga was not rattled. She was adaptive. Within hours, analysts detected another anomaly. A sudden acquisition bid for a smaller oxygen cylinder manufacturer. One not previously flagged in ORPHUS. The acquiring entity traced back through 6 shells to a holding group overlapping with Varga's Energy Infrastructure Fund. She wasn't amplifying shortage at the plant level. She was moving downstream. Control the distribution vessels. Even if production remains stable, bottleneck the containers. Rachel moved fast. Regulators intervened, freezing the acquisition under emergency review setting national supply security. Varga responded publicly within the hour. Press release, strategic investment to enhance resilience during uncertain times. Calibrated language. Non-confrontational. Rachel watched the live broadcast. Varga spoke confidently, projecting measured concern. No mention of Mercer. No denial of consortium. No visible strain. But behind the optics, routing clusters continued to shift. Consortium nodes were redistributing assets rapidly. They were attempting to stay ahead of regulatory containment. Which meant something critical. They still intended to activate event cascade in some form. Rachel reviewed ORPHU's predictive modeling again. There was an alternate branch. If primary vertical interference occurs, activate secondary trigger media amplification of minor supply delays combined with speculative commodity trading to simulate shortage volatility without actual physical disruption. Market-driven panic instead of logistics-driven scarcity. Less risk. Faster yield. Rachel turned to Roland. They pivot to financial instruments, she said. Commodity derivatives. He nodded slowly. Short the supply futures. Inflate perception. Rachel authorized immediate coordination with financial oversight authorities. Trading patterns were flagged. Within hours, suspicious volume spikes were frozen pending review. Every time the consortium shifted, Rachel countered with exposure. But exposure requires speed, and speed increases risk of error. Late evening, a new alert surfaced. One oxygen transport truck overturned on a rural highway. Minor injuries, no major leakage. But social media amplification began within minutes. Major oxygen spill. Regional hospital shortages imminent. Bot activity detected. Coordinated. Rachel moved quickly. Live streamed footage from the site showing minimal disruption. Transparency again. Panic curve suppressed. She leaned back in her chair. The consortium was testing response latency. Every test revealed countermeasures, which meant they were learning her thresholds too. This was no longer purely investigative. It was strategic chess. Mercer believed in demonstration through paralysis. Varga believed in calibration through stress testing. Rachel believed in visibility as deterrent. But deterrence only works if exposure remains ahead of adaptation. And adaptation never stops. Her secure line vibrated once more. Text only, no sender ID, control is perception. Rachel stared at the message. Then she looked at the dashboard. Production stable, transport monitored, acquisitions frozen, derivatives flagged, perception requires fog. She had reduced fog, but fog returns when attention drifts. The consortium's greatest weapon wasn't paralysis. It was patience, and patience can outlast outrage. Rachel understood the next phase wouldn't be dramatic. No staged rooms, no water glasses. It would be subtle economic tremors, enough to test whether public transparency could sustain long-term vigilance. The murders had exposed the system. Now the system was attempting to prove it could survive exposure. The 6-week window was still active. Only now, it wasn't about suffocation in a hotel room. It was about suffocation by scarcity narrative. And narrative, once seeded, spreads faster than any toxin. Narratives do not need to be true. They need to be repeated. 3 days after the oxygen transport incident, financial talk shows began asking carefully phrased questions. Are regional hospitals overexposed to single-source oxygen supply? Should investors anticipate strain in respiratory infrastructure? Is emergency preparedness adequately funded? The questions were neutral. The framing was not. Commodity derivatives tied to medical gases fluctuated sharply. Nothing catastrophic. Just enough to create volatility bands. Volatility invites speculation. Speculation invites movement. Rachel stood in the Federal Strategy Room reviewing market telemetry overlays beside public sentiment analytics. They're not pushing panic, Roland observed. They're nudging expectation. Rachel replied. Expectation drives procurement behavior. Hospitals, even without confirmed shortage, began placing precautionary orders at slightly elevated volumes. Not enough to cause physical scarcity, enough to tighten buffer margins, which makes the system feel fragile, exactly as modeled in Event Cascade's secondary branch. Rachel requested deeper forensic tracing of the bot amplification clusters that followed the truck accident rumor. The digital team isolated repeating command signatures embedded in posting patterns. Routing cluster overlapped with a data consultancy, previously contracted by one of Varga's infrastructure funds. Indirect, layered, but consistent. Meanwhile, Mercer remained in federal detention. His legal team filed motions challenging admissibility of ORPHUS, derived evidence on grounds of the provenance ambiguity. Standard procedural attack. Delay. Complicate. Diffuse focus. Rachel visited him again. He appeared thinner, not physically weakened. Mentally recalculating. They've shifted, she said without introduction. Mercer gave a faint nod. Of course. You anticipated it. I anticipated adaptation. Rachel studied him. You built a distributed network to avoid collapse if one node fails. Mercer's eyes held hers. You're applying pressure across verticals simultaneously. That accelerates counter-innovation. Rachel leaned forward. What's the endgame? Mercer paused. There isn't one, he said. There is only equilibrium. By manipulating scarcity cycles. By stabilizing overreaction. Mercer corrected. Rachel didn't debate philosophy. Varga is testing response latency through narrative pressure, she said. Mercer did not deny it. You can't arrest perception. He replied quietly. No. Rachel said. But you can expose its architects. For the first time, Mercer's expression shifted into something resembling warning. Elena doesn't need physical disruption, he said. She only needs doubt sustained long enough for markets to adjust. How long? Rachel asked. He held her gaze. Longer than public attention. Rachel left without another word. Back at operations, she authorized a new strategy. Instead of reactive debunking, they would preemptively publish stress test simulations derived from ORPHEUS itself, stripped of proprietary exploitation layers but transparent about how scarcity narratives amplify volatility. Expose the mechanism before it activates. Public education as counter-leverage. Within 24 hours, a joint federal briefing aired live. Charts displayed how minor logistical delays can be misinterpreted, how derivative trading magnifies perception, how automated social amplification accelerates procurement panic. No mention of consortium by name. But the pattern was clear. The effect was measurable. Commodity volatility narrowed. Hospital procurement volumes stabilized. Narrative velocity slowed. Rachel watched sentiment analytics in real time. Trust index rising. Fear index declining. Varga responded the next day. Another press appearance. Calm, measured, concerned. She praised transparency initiatives while subtly reframing the issue as structural fragility in global infrastructure, positioning herself as solution architect, not antagonist. Rachel reviewed the speech transcript. Every line was calibrated. No direct confrontation. No denial. Repositioning. If she couldn't exploit scarcity narrative immediately, she would pivot toward policy influence. Long-term leverage instead of short-term yield. That shift concerned Rachel more, because policy capture outlasts market manipulation. Late evening. Encrypted channel intercept. Consortium routing cluster showing abnormal spike. Not financial. Communications. Cross. Vertical message tagged. Phase C reconsideration. Rachel opened the decrypted fragment. Phase C in ORPHEUS reference tertiary escalation. Localized infrastructure failure to reinforce authenticity of scarcity narrative. Not catastrophic. Not mass casualty, but tangible. Small facility outage, pipeline maintenance delay, electrical substation fault, real-world friction to validate perception. Rachel felt the tension sharpen. Where? Roland asked. She scanned predictive risk overlays, energy grid nodes overlapping with oxygen production plants, transport hubs supplying hospitals, fuel depots servicing logistics fleets. One region lit amber on the map. An aging electrical substation feeding a major oxygen bottling facility. Maintenance had been deferred twice due to budget disputes. A small outage there would not cause catastrophe, but it would create authentic delay. Authenticity feeds narrative. Rachel immediately contacted Federal Energy Oversight. Emergency inspection ordered. Backup generators deployed preemptively. Public advisory issued before any disruption occurred. Within 12 hours, inspection revealed deliberate tampering with a transformer relay, not catastrophic, but sufficient to cause a controlled outage within days. Sabotage disguised as wear. Helix fingerprints absent. Different operational style. More decentralized. Varga's calibration. The sabotage was neutralized before activation. Public disclosure followed. Measured, factual. Preventative maintenance discovered irregularity. No disruption occurred. Narrative denied oxygen. Rachel leaned back. Every move the consortium attempted required shadow. She was flooding the board with light, but light requires constant power, and attention fatigue is real. Public vigilance fades. Media cycles shift. Consortium patience endures. Her secure line vibrated once more. Text message. Elena Varga requests formal meeting. Neutral venue. Rachel stared at it. Voluntary engagement. Not common for someone operating through distributed insulation. Why now? Roland asked. Because Phase C failed. Rachel replied. And she wants to redefine the game. Rachel considered the implications carefully. A direct meeting meant one of two things. 1. She believed negotiation could salvage long-term leverage. 2. She wanted to assess the threat in person. Rachel agreed to the meeting under controlled federal conditions. Neutral venue selected. An international economic summit already underway in the city. Public environment. Heavy security. No private shadows. As she prepared briefing materials, she reviewed the case from the beginning. Leonard Vale, paralyzed in a hotel room. Water glass placed within reach. Demonstration of controlled. Mercer, detained. Helix, fractured. ORPHEUS, exposed. Consortium, adapting. Elena Varga, recalibrating. This was no longer about suffocation in silence. It was about whether exposure could permanently disrupt a distributed leverage architecture, and whether someone like Varga would accept diminished control or escalate beyond calibration. The summit meeting was scheduled for the following morning. Rachel closed the file. The murders had been intimate. The next confrontation would be strategic. And strategy, unlike paralysis, does not require proximity to suffocate. It requires patience and the willingness to wait for attention to drift. Rachel did not intend to let it. The summit floor was built for optics, glass walls, flags aligned in symmetrical precision, translation headsets resting on polished tables, security visible but not intrusive, control through transparency. Detective Rachel Monroe arrived 10 minutes early. Elena Varga arrived exactly on time. No entourage beyond two advisors who remained at a distance. No visible tension. She carried herself with the calm of someone accustomed to negotiating energy treaties and infrastructure concessions across borders. They did not shake hands. "You prefer light to shadow," Varga said as she took her seat. "I prefer visibility," Rachel replied. Varga gave a faint nod. "Visibility creates instability. It creates accountability." Silence settled between them, not hostile, but analytical. "You've neutralized short-term cascade potential," Varga continued. "Impressive coordination." "You attempted localized infrastructure sabotage," Rachel said evenly. "Tempted." Varga's eyebrow lifted slightly. "We prevented it." Varga did not deny it. Instead, she adjusted tone. "You exposed Mercer," she said. "You fractured Helix. You disrupted financial routing clusters." "Yes. But the consortium persists," Varga said calmly. Rachel met her gaze. "Not intact." Varga folded her hands lightly. "You assume dismantling requires arrest. It does not. Networks dissolve quietly when yield decreases." Rachel listened. "You've reduced immediate leverage," Varga continued. "Which forces reallocation?" "Where?" Rachel asked. "Elsewhere." "Energy, water, logistics, data, distributed systems migrate." Rachel leaned forward slightly. "Then why request this meeting?" Varga did not answer immediately. "Because escalation benefits no one," she said finally. "Exposure has already altered risk metrics. Continued confrontation may destabilize sectors you claim to protect." There it was. Negotiation framed as mutual stability. "You're proposing retreat," Rachel said. "I'm proposing recalibration," Varga corrected. "Without scarcity engineering, without theatrical demonstration," Varga replied. A quiet reference to Mercer. Rachel studied her carefully. "You disagreed with his methods," she said. "He confused fear with durability. And you don't." "I prefer predictability." Rachel let that settle. "Predictability for profit," she said. "Predictability prevents panic. You manufacture panic." Varga's tone sharpened slightly. "Markets panic naturally. We only position advantageously." Rachel slid a thin folder across the table. Inside were time-stamped ORPH's projections, intercepted routing clusters, transformer sabotage photos, bot amplification analytics. "We can escalate this publicly," Rachel said. "Full disclosure. International inquiry. Consortium node identification." Varga glanced at the folder, but did not open it. "And destabilize supply markets in 5 regions simultaneously," she replied. "Is that your objective?" Rachel did not respond emotionally. "My objective is preventing engineered volatility." Varga leaned back slightly. "Then understand this," she said. "The consortium has already paused Phase C not because of fear, because yield no longer exceeds exposure." Rachel caught the nuance. "Paused," she repeated. "Yes. Conditional. Everything is conditional." Rachel held her gaze. "Dissolve it." Varga's lips curved faintly. "You cannot dissolve a principle. Principles don't reroute anesthetics to suffocate auditors." Varga's eyes hardened briefly, not defensively, but analytically. "Mercer exceeded mandate," she said. "Mandate from whom?" Varga did not answer directly. "You forced structural transparency," she continued. "That alters operational calculus." Rachel recognized the admission. ORPHU's exposure had shifted the cost-benefit ratio. "You're saying the model isn't viable under sustained visibility." "For now." The qualifier did not go unnoticed. Rachel stood. For now is enough. Varga rose as well. You believe you've won? She said quietly. This isn't victory, Rachel replied. It's interruption. Varga considered that. Interruption creates innovation, she said. And innovation leaves traces. Rachel responded. A long pause. Then Varga extended her hand. This time Rachel accepted. Not agreement. Acknowledgement. As Varga stepped away, she turned once more. You prevented suffocation, she said. Ensure your transparency infrastructure remains funded. Markets forget quickly. She exited toward the summit hall, cameras flashing as she resumed public persona. Rachel remained still for several seconds. The consortium had not been dismantled, but it had been forced into retreat. Phase C neutralized. Event cascade disrupted. Medical vertical fractured. Energy escalation exposed. Mercer would face trial. Solberg would testify. Helix operatives would cooperate. And the ORPHEUS archive, redundantly distributed, remained beyond single node erasure. Later that evening, Rachel stood alone in the operations room. Dashboard stable. Commodity volatility normalized. Oxygen production steady. Transport monitored. No staged rooms. No water glasses. No silent suffocations. For now, Roland entered quietly. It's quiet, he said. Too quiet, he asked. Rachel considered that. Quiet without paralysis. She replied. He nodded slowly. You think they regroup? Wes? When? One exposure fades. Rachel turned back to the evidence board one final time. Leonard Vale. 4 prior victims. Allison Grant, survived. Conrad Mercer, detained. Alina Varga, recalibrating. The pattern had evolved from intimate murder to systemic manipulation, and systems do not die easily, but they do weaken when light remains constant. Rachel powered down the primary dashboard. Before leaving, she paused over a single photograph from room 312. The water glass, half full, placed deliberately within reach of a man who could not move. Control through proximity. She removed the photograph from the board. Filed it. Closed the case file. Not because the consortium was gone, but because the immediate cascade had been intercepted. Outside, the city moved normally. Hospitals functioning. Markets stabilizing. No visible crisis. Which meant the strategy had failed. This cycle, Rachel stepped into the night air. Volatility would return in another form, another sector, another narrative. But next time, the model would be recognized sooner, because exposure teaches pattern recognition, and pattern recognition dismantles illusion. Leonard Vale had uncovered the architecture. Allison Grant had survived it. Mercer had demonstrated it. Varga had recalibrated it, and Rachel had interrupted it. For now,